This episode of the Police One podcast is sponsored by Officer Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting officerstore.com. Hey, welcome back to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm Jim Dudley, and be sure and check us out on our YouTube channel as well. Hey, have you ever gone to a child neglect call only to discover dozens of emaciated dogs on scene? What do you do when there's no animal services to call for help, and now you're responsible for seizing multiple dogs? Or have you ever gotten that call involving the vicious dog, or a bird, or a snake, or a raccoon, or even a mountain lion or a bear? Well, I hear from our fellow law enforcement officers across the country who are showing me snippets of, pulling alligators out by the tail, or trying to wrangle a snake or a raccoon in somebody's laundry room. I've been talking to our guests today a little bit, and we're talking about, are the animals creeping more into our territory, or are we building out into their habitat? I think it's the latter. Well, in some places, like I described, we have the luxury of punting to animal services, animal control officers who do an outstanding job, much better than I know the majority of law enforcement officers could do. But in smaller venues and those rural areas, you may be the only game in town. Are you trained as you should be? Well, we have a guest today from the Humane Society of the United States, the HSUS Law Enforcement Training Center. And Trevor Whipple is a retired chief and a graduate of the FBI National Academy, served as a sworn law enforcement officer from 1980 until his retirement in 2018. He is a member of the adjunct faculty at the Community College of Vermont, where he's instructed criminal justice courses for the past 16 years. With the Humane Society of the United States Law Enforcement Training Center, Trevor continues to train law enforcement nationwide on animal crime investigations. Well, welcome to Policing Matters, Trevor Whipple.
Well, Jim, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for coming. I looked through the website. I've got the links posted below, and you do some really great stuff there. I look at the classes described in the curriculum: animal cruelty and fighting investigations, police and dog encounters, even equine horse cruelty investigations. Tells a little bit about these. Probably the first two more germane to what a regular law enforcement officer might come across.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, as you point out, sometimes you just never know what you're going to come across. Myself working in the field for 38 years, every day is a surprise. But certainly the courses that you've picked out of our catalog that would be great to highlight. The first being animal cruelty and fighting investigations, is we really, that tends to be a full day training, about an 8-hour training, where we spend time talking about not so much how to do an investigation. Most times what we find is that people enter these classes with some basis already. They've been an enforcement official somewhere. Certainly if they're new, we'll tailor to somebody with fewer skills. But we're looking at what is animal cruelty. Each state defines it differently. Some states are much more, they have much more robust laws. Some states have pretty light laws. So we have to work within what we have, and we work within those laws to help enforcement officers, whether it be police officers, humane officers, to really understand how do we, identify if animal cruelty or neglect has taken place. We may need a subject matter expert to help us. As you point out, maybe a horse. I don't know that much about a horse, or I don't know that much about an alligator. So I might need to consult with somebody that does. But also, these are investigations. These are cases that have victims that don't have voices. So we're having to build the case solely on evidence. So we really spend a lot of time about identification of evidence, the appropriate collection, labeling, and storage of evidence. These cases can be a challenge. When I was a road officer, I was really well schooled in how to identify drug evidence. We'd find a bag of heroin, you'd photograph it in place, you'd label it, you'd bag it, you'd put it in the evidence room. And then it would stay there for 2 years until the case. Well, what if your evidence is a golden retriever? You're not going to tag and bag your golden retriever and put it in an evidence room for 2 years. There's a challenge. So we really talk about how to meet some of those challenges. In the fighting investigations, not a lot of officers in our country have had much experience in either cockfighting or dogfighting. So we spend time talking about what are the mechanics of a fight? What are the tools of the trade? Some of the training tools that they use, some of the supplements or materials that an animal fighter might have to read or study. So we really help officers to build kind of that store chest of knowledge so that when they do go in the field, they might suddenly understand, oh, what I'm seeing is meaningful. It's particularly meaningful now that I have this knowledge and I know that it may, in fact, pertain to someone who's raising or training fighting dogs or fighting roosters. And it provides a much better platform for these police officers to identify that a crime may be taking place, identify if they have probable cause, and then have some foundation of training and knowledge to move forward to potentially seek a search warrant. So it really helps to build that knowledge base for investigators going forward that they can fall back on and to identify. But then even once they identify, then how do we do it with some sort of expertise? So that's kind of the animal cruelty fighting investigations in a very nutshell. The police dog encounters, that can be a sensitive subject. We don't want to tell, I'm a police officer through and through. I will never not be a police officer. Born, bred, that's in my blood. But certainly, we want to make sure that when police officers engage with animals in the community, that they have the tools available to them to have the best encounter possible. We know that, myself included, family pets are like children to many folks. And if a police officer happens to have a really negative encounter with a dog where perhaps lethal force is needed to be used against that animal, some of the most negative press releases we see, negative interactions between law enforcement and the community is when a police officer has to shoot a family pet. So we really talk about in police dog encounters, how do we read the signs from a dog to understand if there's some sort of danger or anxiety there? How might we best approach the dog to minimize that potential of aggression? And if there is known aggression, then what tools can we bring to bear? Is there certain equipment? Can we bring an animal control officer or somebody who's trained in handling an aggressive animal to minimize the potential for those negative encounters? I use as an example a case, it was a Second Circuit case out of Hartford, Connecticut, where a police officer shot a family pet. And it was settled, the police department was sued, but it was settled out of court for, I believe it was over $600,000. So from a liability standpoint, we also want to share this knowledge with officers to give them the tools to hopefully not have a negative outcome, to have the best outcome possible.
Yeah, and so going back a little bit to animal cruelty and fighting investigations, well, I think it would be pretty apparent if you send officers to a call, say a neighbor calls or somebody in the neighborhood, and you go to a warehouse or a garage and there is a fight and there's money being placed as bets and all of that. But what about in those cases, those sort of incidental cases, where an officer sees the indicia, if you will, scarred up dogs with weightlifting materials nearby, or, these sort of makeshift workout facilities, like our terrorism liaison officers, where they go back and they write the suspicious activity report to go the route that you're talking about taking it for prosecution, for getting search warrants and things. Is that similar to what happens in these kinds of cases? Officer gets on scene for a different kind of call, notices a really scarred up dog, what looks like a training facility. do you describe those kinds of investigations and how you systematically take those to end as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some excellent points because in many jurisdictions, again, not all, but in many jurisdictions, the mere possession of fighting paraphernalia is a crime. In some jurisdictions, it's a felony to possess fighting materials. So that could be a break stick, it could be a treadmill, it could be a spring pole. And we teach these officers, we show examples of them, pictures, so that they'll know. Because if you're not experienced in it, if you've never bumped into it before, these things might be rather benign, or they might be explained away in another fashion.
Mm,
But with some experience, and maybe you're a new officer and you attend this one-day training, and you're not an expert, you're not a subject matter expert, but you've got enough knowledge to say, that's strange. That I think that means something. What we try to do is build connections, build relationships so that we at HSUS have subject matter experts. We have folks that today are working on undercover dogfighting cases. They have a high level of experience and expertise, and they're available for consultation. So if an officer who's new to this perhaps snaps a couple pictures when they're on a drug warrant, but
mm.
they say, gee, that's odd. That I think I've seen that in another training. They can then come back, and as we know, we can always leave one warrant and go and reapply for a new warrant for a probable cause for a new crime. So, we hope to really build out these relationships, the knowledge base, so that folks feel that there's support. Because dogfighting in most jurisdictions isn't something that happens every day, or it's not something that's encountered every day. So it might be the rare occasion. You might go to a training today and it's 3 years from now when all of a sudden you bump into something and, scratch your head and say, oh, I remember. So we want to be able to have those connections, those resources to help.
Yeah. One of the other classes that looks like it would be really relevant is called In the Class on Animal Abuse and Violent Crime. And it's described as an in-depth discussion of the relationship between animal abuse and other violent crime, including gangs and drugs, domestic violence, child abuse. Addresses investigatory techniques and tips to be prepared for other criminal activity likely to be present. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so there's a lot of time spent on this, and it's good knowledge. I think to distill it around, many times we call it the link between animal cruelty, animal crimes, and crimes against human. And what we found time and time again in studies is that people who perpetrate crimes against animals, whether there be cruelty or neglect, there is a high correlation that those will be the same people who will engage in violence against human beings.
Mm.
And we do offer up in these classes some citations to studies. I've recently done a training with the Department of Homeland Security on kind of threat assessment to include this in their assessment as they're looking at potential targets, to say, gee, if they've got a prior history of animal cruelty, that should be something that raises the antenna that we say, aha, we should look a little bit deeper. And so what we find out is that, and we go back historically to Jeffrey Dahmer. We go back to the Boston Strangler. I mean, those individuals during investigation, it was found when they were children, they were perpetrating crimes against animals, pretty violent crimes against animals. I also draw in two very, very recent examples. They're 2 years old now, but the Uvalde school shooting. When they were doing the investigation there, they identified that the Uvalde school shooter had a history of crimes against animals. He was torturing animals. And also the Buffalo shooter, the white supremacist that shot and killed a number of people in Buffalo, New York.
Mhm.
That individual as well had animal cruelty history. So we really highlight that and flesh it out so that we know as officers working in the field, we have phenomenal opportunities to interrupt criminal behavior, sometimes accidentally. We may get called to a noise complaint and suddenly stumble upon something. And what we try to do is we try to educate and bring to notice this co-occurring or this linkage so that if an officer is responding to a crime against an animal, we want them to be open-minded and to be thinking about, okay, if an individual is harming an animal, what about everybody else in that household? Is there some level of interpersonal violence? Is there crimes against children, crimes against the domestic partner, crimes against the elderly? studies have shown that there is a linkage in many cases. But we also train officers to look the other direction because we want to protect animals as much as we want to protect people. So if you're going out on a child abuse and neglect case, while you're there, when you're in a legal point of view, take the opportunity to look around, use plain view, and say, gee, if there's a dog in the backyard, how's the dog being treated? Maybe that dog is also the victim of some sort of criminal behavior. So we spend a lot of time really distilling that, talking about more granular examples so that investigators can really understand, the importance of not missing this link. There are a couple recent studies, both by the FBI and the Secret Service, when they studied recent mass casualty events. They kept this in the forefront of their mind. The FBI in 2016 actually added animal cruelty to their Part 1 crime list. So it rates the same level as homicide, as sexual assault, as burglary, because the FBI saw the importance of not missing these opportunities to understand the linkages and to draw future knowledge and guidance in criminal investigation from understanding these linkages.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting stuff. And I remember the old profile said that these really disturbed people had the pattern of animal abuse, arson, and bedwetting. I think we moved out of that a little bit, but I think what you're talking about is really that lack of empathy. And if there's somebody who could torture an animal, and if somebody surely could torture an animal, human beings are like even lower on the pecking order, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember I was the captain of our juvenile and family services unit for a while. And I recall that the first categories of mandatory reporters beyond police and physicians and nurses and teachers, it included SPCA officers or animal care and control officers, because of, like you're talking about, those casual or collateral observations that they may be making in response to a call about an animal in distress. And that you just described that relationship between animal abuse and domestic violence and possible child abuse. I'm wondering if the direct link is that lack of empathy and the individuals who show no remorse. And I don't want to say it's an easy one, but it is something that we could really identify with and make the connection. Over the last decade or so, our police officers have been told to make any note of children in the home, because there's also the effect of children witnessing violence. And even if, to say, I don't want to downplay it, but if the children themselves are not being abused, the mere fact that they're seeing the animal being abused is really weighing heavily on them now and for the future.
Well, and it's also, as you say, it's also, teaching them that violence is okay, that when you are under stress, it is okay to act out against an animal. That's what we do. Children learn by, seeing what's modeled in front of them. But also, particularly in domestic violence cases, animals are wonderful tools to keep a victim, encumbered in that violent relationship. A victim will go through horrific abuse and remain in that danger zone because they don't want to leave their dog or cat behind. Or there's been a threat: if you leave or if you report to the police, this is what I'm going to do to your animal. I actually use a video of somebody who very subtly has abused a cat. When his domestic partner, she had made some outcry to say, I'm sick of this, I'm going to go to the authorities, I'm going to seek some help. And when she returned home, she hadn't reported yet. When she returned home, he had done some pretty horrific stuff to her cat. Didn't kill it, but basically the warning to say, if you follow through, then I'm going to take the next step.
Mm.
Fluffy is in danger. So there is a whole myriad of things that take place around animals that do have certainly importance in the household, importance in these relationships, and particular importance for children. Because, we for years have heard about, the cautionary tales about violent video games and what does that teach children about empathy and about, harm to others. Well, this is real life. This is animals. And I think it should have the same concerns about what does this do to a child's psyche? What does it do to their development? Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what may be capacity issues in expectation of response from an animal control officer? We're having huge issues with recruiting for law enforcement. I would imagine it's taken its toll on personnel at these shelters and in the Humane Society.
Yeah, I don't think it's at all different from law enforcement. You're right. I mean, the recruitment retention challenges are just insurmountable in law enforcement. And I don't think it's any different in the animal care professional world. These are folks who have a passion for the work. Frankly, they wouldn't be there if they didn't. It's hard work. And, like in law enforcement, they're doing double duty. If they're short-staffed, they can't just not feed or clean the animals. That somebody's got to do that. We have shelters that are beyond capacity. I don't think I've engaged with any animal care professional that's told me that they have extra room at their shelter. They have animals doubled up. Because they don't want to unnecessarily euthanize animals, have, gone over capacity, which, increases their workload, which increases their mental strain, their physical strain. It's a tough time right now, and I give these folks a lot of credit that are sticking with the work, and hope that as within law enforcement, we can get a little more creative with some of our recruitment strategies. We can be hopefully more supportive with those employees that we do have, so that we can retain them. And frankly, when we teach these classes, I love the classes that are blended, where we have certified law enforcement officers, and then I have the civilian animal care professionals. And it's like, you folks got to show each other some love. We need each other. And, I think we need to be there for each other and understand this strain that we're all under. And I think that can be extremely helpful, because we need the relationships in investigations. So we might as well have them personally as well. I think it's very self-serving, but it's great.
Yeah, and all good reasons for law enforcement officers to get that training, so they don't have to rely, or if there's a delay in response, that they could be doing a lot of the work up front.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, and learn to recognize early on, because some of these cases, if we can intervene early on, they're much less egregious, much easier to deal with.
Right, right. So, okay, we get to a call, or we notice a call, or at some point we're going to seize an animal. What happens next? Tiger by the tail.
Well,
Somebody.
that's the big question, Jim, is what are we going to do? It comes down to, what do we have for an animal and how many do we have? Some of these cases, not so bad. Not that it's not bad that an animal's harmed, but I have one emaciated dog. That's not such a big deal. I mean, we seize that dog, we take it to the local animal shelter. They have veterinary services, they care for it. What becomes a problem is when I've got this emaciated dog and I go on property and I find out that there's 40 more in the building out back. Yeah, and then it's oh, you know what? So there, it's hopefully knowing what your resources are, if they are available. Also, it's species. I come from an area of the country that has a lot of large animals. We have a lot of equine. We have a lot of dairy cows. We right now have, I won't talk only generally about it, not specifically, but we have been in the media, a Frisian horse farm with over 100 horses. What would we ever do if we needed to seize 100 horses? How are we going to seize them? How are we going to move them? And then where are we going to put them? So it really comes down to knowing your local resources. And when it does come to the, oh darn, I've got a really big mess, it's knowing your points of contact. Where can we go? Is there other animal control professionals in your area, in your county, in your state that you can call in if it has to do with a farming industry The Department of Agriculture in many states will have some ideas for resources or farms that can take in extra animals. For the Humane Society, for HSUS, for our organization, we do have emergency response teams that, not for every case, but for large scale cases, if it meets the criteria, they can deploy into the field. There was a very remarkable case in New Hampshire where there was 82 Great Danes. They deployed a full complement of staff and stood up a kennel operation for 82 Great Danes for 2 years. It took 2 years to adjudicate that case. No one agency can handle that. So, it's a matter of knowing which friend to call. And then there still are those cases where it is just, from my area of the country, we call it Yankee ingenuity. It's calling all your friends and saying, what do I do? Who can help? Who can take 2 horses? Who can take a pig? Who can take a cow? And, we pull it together and we do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of the experiences that you've had, some of the challenges, and how we can prepare for some of these encounters. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Officer Store, equipping protectors with passion. That's how we operate, and it's how we live. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at officerstore.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Trevor Whipple, animal crime investigations trainer with the Humane Society of the United States at the Law Enforcement Training Center. We've been talking about training and first response. What kind of training's given that helps prepare officers for these kinds of encounters? Is there a sort of animal de-escalation being taught?
Well, when we talk about police dog encounters, we're talking about how to engage with dogs so that we don't trigger aggressive behavior, or we identify aggressive behavior that's pending, that's building. We do work on those situations. Frankly, we talk de-escalation, human and animal simultaneously, because frankly, some of the very same skills work equally as well. When we talk interjecting, time and distance into an encounter, that we know through our use of force studies in law enforcement when we're dealing with humans, that where appropriate and safe, we interject time and distance. Many times we can slow things down, we can lower the temperature. The same thing when we're confronting a dog that may not want us in their presence. If we can safely interject that time and distance, bring the temperature down, it's equally as helpful with animals too. Also, it's recognizing who has the expertise with these animals. We had a case in my jurisdiction that had a significant number of reptiles, various lizards and snakes. I don't know a thing about them, frankly, don't want to know a thing about them. But I know who raised them, and I know who rehabilitated them. And so I called her, and she was game on. She knew exactly how to interface with these animals so that she would be safe and not be bitten or harmed by the animals, but equally as important, so the animals would be safe. She knew how to approach them. She knew how to pick them up and handle them. So we do spend time in some of our programs talking about those specific dynamics.
Yeah, and so we talked a little bit about personnel shortage. What's the other big challenge in animal response?
I think that first and foremost is getting folks to recognize the importance of it. I absolutely understand and accept that there are folks that work in our law enforcement agencies. There are folks in our communities that don't have a particular soft spot for animals. They don't have connections to animals. Animals aren't particularly meaningful for them. What I do hope is that our law enforcement officials, maybe they don't have the compassion for animals. They don't let the dog sleep on the bed. But what we do hope is that they recognize the importance of, appropriate treatment of animals. What are the standards of care? What are the basic necessities that should be met as an animal owner? And then realizing the significance if those aren't being met. It's not just harm to the animal. It's this greater sphere of is there other things going on in that household or in that family? So that's a challenge, to just get everybody to kind of open their eyes and say this is meaningful. And what I hope is that when we see the FBI, the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico saying, no, this is important. Since 2016, we're collecting the data. That's probably the number one challenge, but officers are generally open-minded and willing to listen to that. The other significant challenge, as I've already discussed, are access to resources. What do we do when we get one of these big cases? How do we fund it? How do we find the staff or the facilities? That can be a challenge. So, that screams to even more the importance of identifying these situations before they start to really spiral out of control. If somebody's an animal hoarder, far better to deal with them when they have 20 cats than when they have 60. So it's really having our frontline officers trained to recognize these signs and intercede sooner than later.
Mm. Yeah, good stuff there. I got to tell you, for the record, I love my dog, 6-year-old rescue, half Rottweiler, half German Shepherd. Soka is part of the family, but she doesn't get to sleep in the bed. Sorry.
That's all right. She doesn't have to. As long as you take appropriate care of her, sleeping on the bed is not a requirement.
There you go. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay.
In these situations, the crime scenes are different. What should officers be mindful of in preserving or identifying evidence, whether at an indoor location or outdoors? Well, we know, if we don't grab it now, it's probably not going to be around later.
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to, when if you're an agency, and hopefully you are one that does an ops plan, before you go in to do a seizure, to execute a search warrant, is hopefully you've done some good reconnaissance. Now, sometimes we get surprised. We know that in any type of an investigation. But when it comes to animals, to do as much homework as you can to pre-identify what do we think we're going to experience, and to come in with appropriate resources. And one of the big challenges is that this is moving evidence. We are trained from day one at our police academies, identify the evidence, don't touch it, photograph it in place, appropriately label it, make sure that we collect it and package it and label it, and then we have a good chain of custody. Well, if you've got 40 cats running around this house, it's going to be a little tough. So it's do the best we can. And if you do have animal care professionals with you, to make sure that they're instructed about police procedure when it comes to evidence identification, evidence labeling, evidence seizing. There have been cases where well-meaning folks will come in, see an animal in distress, know that it needs some immediate attention, and they'll pick it up and they'll take it outside to the veterinarian that might be there, and potentially miss the opportunity to delay for 10 seconds and photograph it in place, and make sure that if we do have an evidentiary challenge later on, and as I said way early in this discussion, these are evidence cases built on evidence. So, if you do have a case go forward, the defense counsel is going to target the evidence and want it suppressed. So everything we can do to make sure that this evidence is as well documented, as well preserved as can be. So if we have these animal care professionals, make sure that they understand before you try to help that animal, remove it from this horrid situation, get it some help, make sure that we identify it, we label it, we photograph it, then you can run it outside to get help. So it's just having these relationships, training together can be beneficial in these circumstances. And then also, once we seize this evidence, as I've said, it's living, breathing, moving. So, that Rottweiler, the emaciated Rottweiler we seized today, this case may not go to court for 12 months. And, if the defense counsel parades that Rottweiler in 12 months from now,
looks great,
they're going to, say to the jury, there's nothing wrong with this dog. Well, we want to make sure that we do our due diligence and document that as minutely as we can, so that we can face those challenges later on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you heard what I said at the very beginning. I want to ask you about your high profile incidents that you can recall here in San Francisco. Now, across the country, like I said, I got photographs or videos sent to me of officers with alligators by the tail, or snapping turtles on a stick, or bag of raccoons or what have you. But even here in an urban setting in San Francisco, in July of 2024, we had a 5-year-old bitten by a coyote in the city. We've had deer run amok through houses. Just north of us, we had a bear attack a woman in her home, kill her, partially eat her. We talk about, infringing upon their habitats. Give us a couple of situations that you've encountered that really were challenging for you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as wild animals, I don't think there's anything that really stands out. We do have the animals attacking other animals, where we have the coyote that takes down a lamb and kills the lamb, or a fox or a weasel that will take out a whole flock of chickens. And those aren't so much crimes against people; those aren't impacting people, but they are impacting their animals. We do have cats that are killed by wild animals, or even dogs. So, it really comes down to, anyone that may be, partaking and listening to this discussion is just, know your habitat around you, and try to understand the behavior of the animals. And you're right. I think significant causation of this is that humans are encroaching upon wild animal territory and giving them less territory to live in. But we're also providing them somewhat easy access to food source. So I think if we come from communities where we do have the encroachment of wildlife, that even as law enforcement officials, that we try to identify, can we work with our Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game, whatever we have, or conservation officers to say, can we do community information bulletins that talk about, don't leave your trash outside. I have to secure your trash in an animal-proof, bin of some kind. In my area of the country with the black bears, make sure you clean your grill after you grill that nice juicy steak, because you know what, Mama Bear is going to want to come out and finish cleaning up that mess for you. So anything we can do to prevent drawing them to us, to disrupt that behavior is helpful, because the more they learn that if they come to man, they come to human to get some easy access to food, the more they're going to do that. So if we can not have that happen, then they're not going to learn that we're the easy access, and they're going to continue in their natural habitat, and in that environment.
Yeah. Well, retired Chief Trevor Whipple, this must be a labor of love to go back to teach about these animal investigations. Good for you.
It is. I enjoy it, but what I enjoy is working with the folks who are really eager and passionate to do this work, seeing those collaborations, and also seeing the outcomes. Seeing people held accountable, seeing animals rescued from pretty abhorrent situations. So it makes it all worth it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time with us today. And like I said, we're going to put the link down below, your full bio as well. So if our listeners want to learn more about you and learn about the HSUS website and how they could get access to some of this really valuable training, that's there for our viewers as well. Hey, thanks so much for taking time with us today.
Jim, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Hey, to our listeners, let me know what you think. Definitely check on the links below. And if you can access some of this training, like Chief Whipple just said, it might not be something that you handle tomorrow or next month, but down the line, it may come in handy and be very valuable for you. All right, take good care. Drop me a line at policingmatters@policeone.com. Love to hear your feedback. And hey, stay safe, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.